So good evening, everybody. My name is Kim Berry-Jones, and I'm the director of the Center for Justice and Reconciliation at the university, and happy to kick this night off with Sam Kwapong from the Office of, I always stumble over your name, from Mosaic. I know what it is. It's just I get the Zoom nerves. But anyway, Sam will have in a minute will be introducing himself. But this Couple Culture series is our last night of a series of 7 that we started back last fall. And of course, when we started planning it, we didn't imagine that we'd be on Zoom all year long, but we have found the silver lining in that, and that we feel like we've reached a lot more people than might have shown up to an event on campus. So we are probably closing in on about 700 folks that have joined us throughout the year at Cup of Culture events. And it was born out of a conversation that Sam and I had about difficult conversations and what we call wedge issues. So those things that are hard to talk about, people feel divided around maybe, or maybe we just don't talk about them and we don't know a lot about them. And so he and I started brainstorming a little over a year ago about what it would look like to come together with our 2 centers and work together on a common goal of elevating particular conversations and starting up new conversations. So that has been the goal this year. It's been really a wonderful journey. We've had some amazing people speak to us and have conversation with us, answer questions from us. And we're excited about what this will look like next year, where we can hopefully move into somewhat of an in-person mode, really as a way to continue to foster conversation, face-to-face conversation. So I'm going to kick it to you, Sam, to fill in the gaps and then introduce our this evening's moderator and host, Dana Hozak.
Thank you, Kim. Hey, I know Kim basically said it all. It's been an amazing year, and I want to just start off by saying thank you for everyone that have been part of this program from the beginning. You know, like Kim said, when we first started, we were not thinking, COVID was not even here yet when we had this conversation, so nobody knew what COVID was, and we had this great idea of gathering in person. And so we're hoping that next year, this coming fall, as Point Loma plans are opening fully in person, we'll be able to kind of lay out everything that we've been doing. But so far, virtual event, it's been amazing, it's been awesome. This idea of having hard conversation is something that's very near and dear to my heart, because as someone that works in diversity and inclusion, my office, that's what we do. We have these hard conversations all the time. And one of the things that I have come to learn is agreement is not always understanding. And understanding doesn't mean you agree, right? Our ideas are well thought out. Wherever street you're on, whatever color you align yourself with, red or blue, we gotta have conversation around the hard issues in our society. I am so much excited to hear this month's topic, because this month's topic is not really a topic where we have for and against, right? We talk about youth homelessness, and in preparation for this, in 2018, there was a statistic that was done. I got this from the YMCA website, and it was talking about 928 out of, I think they rounded up homeless people and kind of went around and did service for them. 8,576 of them, 928 were unaccompanied youth. And that number is 928 more than we should have. Homelessness in general is a big problem in our society, and specifically youth homelessness is something that we need to really have the conversation around. I have sat in my office with some of my own student leaders and talked about where they're going to sleep tonight. And I am very excited to have experts in the field who are going to talk about what we can do to help, what the climate around this topic looks like. So I am super stoked, and I can't wait to hear. I'm gonna shout out and hear the experts talk. And I want to invite Miss Dana Hozak. She is going to be our moderator for today. Dana is a dear friend of mine. I appreciate her, and she's one of the most amazing people that you ever meet. And she's going to lead the conversation today, and she's going to introduce the rest of the people that are going to talk to us. So, Dana, take it away.
And hey, I'm just, before you start, I just want to say, Sam, I know that you're from the Office of Multicultural and International Student Services. I just had my Zoom webinar host nerves running that first minute. So I feel like an idiot, but I just want to make sure to get that in there. And also just a couple of housekeeping things. We will be taking question and answers, which is always a really important part of our event. So please send those through the Q&A box, not through chat. And Dana will be moderating a Q&A later. And then this also is an event that you can get chapel credit for if you follow the process for getting alternative chapel credit. So now to Dana, who is also one of my dear friends and sounding boards and someone I greatly respect, who's been doing this work for a long time. Thank you, Dana, for being with us tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kim and Sam. And sorry, I thought I was on mute, and I think I cleared my throat right before I came on the video. Sorry. Zoom nerves are real, people. So as Sam and Kim mentioned, I work here at PLNU. I'm the director of community ministries, and I serve in the Office of Spiritual Development. And I have the opportunity to work with students, which some you are here tonight, that go off campus and volunteer with local organizations similar to the ones that we'll hear from tonight. And to start us off, I just wanted to talk a little bit about just introducing homelessness, how we see it through the lens of our faith and our faith tradition. Specifically at Point Loma is we're a faith-based liberal arts school, and we're founded by a Protestant denomination, which is called the Church of the Nazarene. And similar Protestant denominations would be Presbyterian and Wesleyan, Methodist, Church of God, that sort of thing. And so our faith tradition believes we must care for our neighbors, and especially the least of these in the world in a caring and compassionate and honoring way. And we believe the image of God is in each other, and we are called to honor that. And so our faith tradition sought out biblical justice for all people from the beginning, whether it was in standing up against slavery or serving single mothers in downtown Los Angeles, where we were founded. And service and love of neighbor has always been at the forefront. And our hope is that PLNU students and graduates, and obviously faculty and staff, will engage the world as thoughtful and service-minded and engaged members of their communities, no matter what their vocation is. And thus, it's not just a nice thing to be an advocate and share resources. It's part of being a follower of Christ. And I think if you explore other faith traditions, you would see that mandate as well. And I'm grateful that PLNU has that as part of its mission. I am not the expert here. I'm excited to introduce my new friends and let them take it away. It's such an important topic, and Point Loma is involved in just a little bit, and I'm excited to hear more ways that we can be engaged with our community, both with the Monarch School and San Diego Youth Services. So I want to start off by introducing Afira DeVries, and she is the CEO and president of the Monarch School Project here in downtown San Diego, East Village area, and downtown, near Petco Park, great. And she has a 2-decade career as a health and human services executive. And in my brief introduction with her, is an innovative person and loves students. And I'm so excited to hear her heart and also have her be able to share or introduce Zaira and have her share with us as well. So Afira, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day to log into this discussion, right? We're living in a time where taking in important information, you have to really decide it's important to you to make the effort. So I appreciate that you've all chosen to spend some time with us tonight. I wanted to start by offering 3 thoughts before sort of sharing with you a little bit of the lay of the land for what it means to be unhoused and young in the United States, particularly in our state. But I thought maybe offering a couple of frames might be helpful. First, really sort of tactically and practically, I wanted to share that when you hear me use the word homeless in today's discussion, it will be used to describe systems or conditions, not to describe people. People-centered language is important for facilitating the dignity of the human condition. And so calling somebody homeless really is applying a stigma to their life that completely removes them from the equation. And it really implies a permanent state as opposed to a temporary state of being. So when I refer to people, I will refer to them as unhoused or people who are experiencing homelessness. I hope that you will hear that and also adopt that language in your further and future discussions. I also wanted to kind of start by just sharing a quick thought based on a recent interaction I had with someone I was cultivating to contribute to my organization. Big part of my job is to raise the money that it takes to do this work. At Monarch School, what we do is provide a really robust, high-level, effective education for unhoused youth exclusively. That's what we do here. And we support their families also in helping them find stability. We're the only school of our kind. We're a public school. There is no other in the country. And we do our work through the lens of social and emotional development. So everything we do here at Monarch School is about making sure that first, a child's trauma and emotional needs are sufficiently cared for and addressed, and then providing them with access to the world that they may not have seen yet through the lens of education. But when you're having that conversation with people, what you often hear, what I often hear, is a message that sort of assumes that families and caregivers who are unhoused are also not good at the job, right? They're kind of the problem. So one of the things I wanted to say now to frame this conversation for myself and for my friends and colleagues who will join me in today's discussion is almost everything that we're conditioned to believe about the homeless condition isn't true. Almost everything you see on TV about what that experience is like is exaggerated or just boldly untrue. Here's what is true. Parents care almost universally. They want the best for their children almost universally. Circumstances that they find themselves in are often beyond their control and typically spiral out of control. And most importantly, they have assets that are far beyond the material. And that's important because how do you help someone help themselves? By leveraging their assets and helping them identify what they already have going for them. So please take that thinking into today's discussion as a frame. And then the last framing thought I wanted to share with you is a philosophical one. And it's really pretty simple. It's something you already know, and it's that all human beings operate in 2 worlds. We operate in an internal world of our own making, which is made up of our self-belief, of our talents, our new ideas, what we think we're good at, who we are, what we think we can become, our fears, what scares us, what's hurt us. And we also operate in an external world something that is far beyond our control, and it's made up of stigmas and structures and oppressive forces and opportunities and privilege. Those two worlds are not generally compatible when you're struggling. And in fact, our job as caregivers to youth and children who are struggling with the condition of homelessness, our job fundamentally is to help them build an internal capacity, get a handle on their internal world so that they are adequately prepared to combat the external forces that are in place to prevent them from succeeding. Now, does that mean everyone's out for them? No, but it means that they will ultimately make a decision about who's in control of their lives. Is it the external forces that exist, or is it the internal world that they cultivate? That's what we do at any school, and that's certainly what we do at a school like ours, at Monarch School, one built for the purpose of addressing trauma, building resilience, and preparing kids to overcome an extraordinarily traumatizing experience that comes with homelessness. So here's the deal. Here's the situation. In the United States of America, there is approximately 600,000 unhoused people occupying communities across the nation. 40% of those human beings are under the age of 18. That's significant because what that means ultimately is that there is a very large population of hidden youth struggling in ways that are not always transparent to their educators and to the world around them. But they are not sufficiently prepared emotionally or otherwise to receive their education. You can't learn if you don't know where you're going to sleep. You can't learn if you have a toothache and don't have access to medical care. You can't learn if you are constantly worried and scared. Nearly half of all Americans and all homeless people or unhoused people in America, nearly half of them all live in California. And there are 23,000 unhoused youth in San Diego County. That's important because organizations like mine, who are built for the purposes of supporting unhoused youth, well, I only support 300 kids. There are 23,000 unhoused youth in this region. And it is imperative that our community understands that and starts thinking differently about how we operate together to support this population. And there's a specific reason for that. And it has to do with what children experience when they walk through the doors of a school, if that environment isn't prepared to help them as individuals. And schools are generally not prepared to do that. Schools operate against the code that really is about provide the curriculum, remediate where you can, but they're not thinking about how a kid feels when they walk in those doors. And if we're not thinking about that, then we're always going to cultivate generations of unhoused youth that grow up to be unhoused adults. Only 69% of unhoused children in the state of California graduate high school. And that sounds like a big number. The 69%, that means there's a pretty large percentage of that population that go on to live lives that do not prepare them for success as adults. Our school at Monarch, we boast a 90% graduation rate. But the reality is every school needs to be operating against a model that allows them to create the same kind of success rates for students who are amongst their population struggling with the same kinds of conditions that our students struggle with. Here's what I think is incredibly important for you to take away. If you listen to nothing else I say to you today, here's what I really want you to understand. The causes of homelessness in this country are not what they always appear to be. They are far beyond the notion of affordability. Affordability is the symptom, and the deeper illness is a root cause that's about racism and inequity in this country. When you live in a society that makes it very difficult to achieve and attain success because you're starting way back from the starting line, because you've inherited a poverty condition, or because you are new to this country, or because you have faced and addressed substance abuse or mental health crises. You are living in a society that is not built to help you get on your feet. In the United States, the real causes of a pervasive and ubiquitous condition of homelessness, which exists in communities all across this nation, are roots of segregation, redlining, the way immigrants are discriminated against when they come into this country, incarceration. Did you know that Black people represent the largest percentage of the incarcerated population, 6 times that of white people, even though Black people only represent approximately 20% of the United States population? Do you know how hard it is to acquire stable housing or employment if you are an ex-convict in the United States of America? These things matter. They matter significantly, and they're not the things that are talked about often when people talk about addressing the unhoused condition in this country. But they matter because they are embedded in the history of this nation. And it requires us to really do a hard, close look, take a hard, close look at what racism and inequity means at a systemic level. If we're going to solve homelessness in this country, we better start thinking about what it means to undo the damage we did when we created systems that are meant to oppress and segregate people. And access to healthcare. The single most important reason why people go from being stable to being unhoused is because they've met a healthcare crisis that they could not address with either the insurance that they had or a lack of adequate access or care. Those are the factors that really matter that don't often get spoken about. And they absolutely matter for my students. My students are largely people of color. 97% of my student body are people of color. Their parents have either come to this country trying to make their way and were not given access to the life that they really hope to achieve, or they are people, they come from families who just couldn't get their footing under them and have alternated and swung from a tenuous housing condition to an unhoused condition, back and forth throughout the scope of their lives, and they've handed that condition down to their children. That's the reality of the unhoused condition, not just in this country, but certainly in San Diego. And then you overlay affordability. And then you think about what it means to know that you have to make $25 an hour in San Diego in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment for your family. Imagine what that would mean for somebody who's managing a low-wage earning position. So what is the experience like? I'm not going to get into expressive detail here because my colleagues are going to share some thoughts on that. But here's the high-level thoughts I want you to take forward. Imagine you going to school. Imagine when you were 13. Imagine what it meant for you to be a child that went to school knowing that you only had one change of clothes, that you were afraid of what it was going to mean to leave school at the end of the day because you weren't really sure where you were going. What would that do to your mental state and your emotional condition? Here's what our students generally struggle with: a high degree of anxiety and depression. And that anxiety and depression makes it very, very difficult to think clearly, to anticipate any environment beyond the one that you're in, to plan ahead. It makes it very difficult to feel anger or sadness or any emotion without being able to let it consume you and overwhelm you. It causes suicidal ideation. It operates in a space of fear and stigma, which causes our students to retreat and remove themselves from others. And we also see the obvious: dropping out, operating in a street life environment, and dealing with poor health, poor nutrition, poor hygiene, and watching what that impact is on a family. Low self-esteem. It's hard to imagine growing and learning when you don't know what your gifts are. And it's hard to know what your gifts are when you are constantly fogged and clouded in a state of chaos. And that's what being unhoused is. It's a state of chaos and a lack of control that robs you of your inner world and puts you always at the mercy of your external world. There are solutions, and the solutions start with dignity. They start with understanding that affordable housing is necessary and it has to be done in mixed income environments. We can't build projects and create segregated communities that concentrate poverty and think we're going to fix this problem. Schools, teachers, and educators have to be providing trauma-informed educational environments for students so that students are treated like individuals rather than burdens in a sea of normalcy. Kids, all kids, whether they are living their best lives or whether they are experiencing the trauma of homelessness or poverty, they must be treated like individuals in order to cultivate their internal world. Our schools have to do a better job of doing that because that's how you can cultivate someone's stability into adulthood. There are other answers, but I'm going to actually stop here and share my time and hand my time off to someone who can speak much more effectively about the experience of being unhoused in San Diego, and specifically about the experience of coming into an environment like the Monarch School and having access to the environment that we create here in order to help facilitate that internal that I spoke about. Zaida Martinez is with me. Zaida, I'm going to introduce you and ask you to share what you can and are willing to share about what your experience was like with us here at Monarch.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. When Afida and the team asked me if I could come share a little bit, I was more than happy to. I spent so many years kind of ashamed of my past, where I came from, that having a platform in front of you to speak about my time at Monarch is really just a blessing. You never know who's going through it. I think that homelessness is really a very silent stigma. And yeah, so I arrived at the Monarch School in 2011 after my mom left an abusive relationship that she had been in for about 10 years. So I was around 14, 15. And she never left because she was not undocumented, but when she got married, her husband was American. He always held that over her. It was a sort of this abuse that he used. He would threaten to call immigration on her and say that we were going to go to child services and we were never going to see her. And I thank my mom for the bravery of getting out when she did. It was really hard. I still remember, I didn't know that within 24 hours I was going to be completely unhoused. She said, pack a bag, we're going to go to your aunt's house for the weekend. So of course, when you're a teenager and they tell you you're going to be gone for 2 days, you don't think about never coming back to your room. You don't think about abandoning your posters and all of your memorabilia. So I packed the basics to never return. And I arrived at Monarch in 2011. And it was just such a culture shock for me. I was in San Diego, my home, but everyone that I saw was struggling in one way or another. And at this time, I didn't have to hide away, or I didn't have to make excuses about why I couldn't have friends over because my stepdad would get rude or drunk or mean, and everyone, we were just trauma bonding, if that, I don't think that's an appropriate word, but we all understood each other on a level where it's like, you're here, you're obviously, everything's not perfect, and here you can get the counseling, you can get the therapy that you want, and you can get your education. So yeah, that's where I started building my support system. I started going to counseling with our on-site expressive arts therapist. For the first time in my life, I had a teacher ask me, you're not doing good in school. is there something I can do? Is there something going on? Are your needs not being met? And no one had ever asked me that. If I didn't submit a paper or if I failed a test, no teacher was ever like, what's going on in her life? What's not being met? What can I do to help? So seeing that someone cared made me care about my future. And that's what started planting the seed about what I wanted to do. I graduated in 2014, and before that, I had no aspirations to continue my education. I thought I would just graduate, maybe. And I was always like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see what happens there. But I went on a few tours of different, once I joined the college club, I went to UCLA, Point Loma Nazarene, and just saw this whole new world open up in front of me. And I was like, yeah, I want to be here. I feel like for the first time, I could see myself past high school. So once I graduated Monarch School, I went to San Diego City College, and there I was still in that mindset of, I'm an imposter syndrome. I was like, this isn't me. My background doesn't allow this. I had my parents supporting me as much as they could, but it wasn't like my whole life I was taught to like go to further my education. And my first semester there, I did really bad. I failed pretty much all of my classes, which is, now that looking back at it, I knew that was where I needed to grow. And I received help from the on-site mental health center. So San Diego City College has an amazing mental health program where every student qualifies for free services for themselves, their families, and their partners. And yeah, there I started learning more about the importance of mental health and destigmatizing it in my community and destigmatizing it in, like, within my own stigmas. Because growing up in a Latino household, you're like, you don't tell other people your problems, you're going to think you're crazy, or it's none of their business. They don't need to know what goes on in your life. And for once I was like, no, I'm struggling with this, and maybe someone else is too. And that's when my career in the mental health world started. Being there, I actually got a job with the mental health center as a peer advocate. So I would go do presentations both in English and in Spanish. I would interact with students and let them know about our services at the mental health center. And it was an amazing job. Again, I kept on building my support system there. It wasn't until 2018 that I transferred to SDSU. I discovered the world of social work at City College, and I fell in love with it. It was everything that I wanted to do. It was working in a micro and a macro setting. And I just knew that my future was going to be there. My future career was in social work. So I was very fortunate to get accepted to SDSU School of Social Work. And from there, your last two semesters, you have to do a placement to get your internship hours. It's about 500 hours a semester, sorry, not a week. And luckily, I was very fortunate that the director of the mental health center at San Diego City College asked me to come back to the mental health center as an intern, which was huge for me because we usually only take master level students. So that just solidified I love mental health. I love City College, working with students, myself, knowing the population, knowing the needs as much as I could. And yeah, I had an amazing time. I said yes immediately. And I finished my placement once I graduated last May of 2020 from SDSU. And from there, I worked with an agency in San Diego as a case manager. And now I am very lucky to be back at San Diego City College as a case manager and project assistant for a program which is for our students who are houseless or housing insecure. And we help with any needs, basic needs, housing needs that they may have. And I knew that San Diego City College had a huge level of students who were needing services, housing services. Either they lived in their car and they did their homework out of a safe parking shelter, or they lived in crowded apartments with roommates or family members where it'd be like 8 people to a 1-bedroom apartment. I'm sorry, it says my internet connection is a bit unstable, so let me know if I cut off. But just seeing where I started as someone that, I was with my family, but we were housing insecure, seeing the support that I had, and now being able to work at San Diego City College, helping the same demographic that 3-4 years ago, I was part of that demographic. It's something that it's full circle, I think. And I'm very honored. And every day I wake up and tell myself, how can I help? What were the resources that when I was in their position, I could have benefited from? And yeah, just the Monarch School being there, I can honestly say that was a turning point. Had it been any other school, I know that I would not be right here in front of you. I would know that I would not have continued my education past high school. They were really the foundation for the rest of my life. And I think now is like the 10-year anniversary where I arrived at Monarch, and to say that I still have the support would be an understatement. I definitely still have support with them, and the counselors and the teachers that so many years ago provided me with support and with so much caring, and all the resources that were provided to my family and I. It's just something that is so magical, and knowing that we have a 90% graduation rate is incredible. And I'm so proud of all the students, and visiting the campus, I can see where everything formed, where everything changed for me. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today. I'm just so honored to be here, and I'm so honored that the team had me come and present my story a little bit. I used to be very ashamed. I would never tell anyone because, who would want to admit that they were living in a shelter, or that, they didn't know what their family's living situation is going to look like in 5 days, even 2 days. Some students really don't know that. And for me I always minimize everything that I've gone through, but really writing everything down and seeing all the steps that I've taken and seeing all the support that I've garnered over the years it's amazing. And I'd like to thank Afida so much for having me. And just the work that I see her doing at Monarch is just amazing. And the students are so lucky to have an amazing leader. The staff is so amazing to have such an amazing leader in you, Afida. So thank you so much for your time. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, darling. That's very sweet.
Thanks so much, Zaira. Afida, did you want to say anything else before we move on?
I'll just sort of wrap up our Monarch component by saying, Zaida is successful not because of Monarch. She is successful because of her inner world and what she was able to do to cultivate her own strengths and to get to know who she was and what she could become. What we did was enable and create a vehicle for that. And that is what makes our space in social care so important. And it's what makes us such advocates for how important it is for the educational community and environment to cultivate the individual student and to make the work about the person, not about the condition. So I'm very proud of Zaida. She's not the only one. She's ours for today. But there are so many other young people who have succeeded in life by understanding who they are and what they bring to this world, and using those assets to combat the forces that are not necessarily working in their favor. So I'm excited to be here with her.
Really. Thank you so much, Afida. And Zaira, thank you so much for just being willing to share your story and your journey. That is so brave. It's so brave, and it's so encouraging to hear how far you've come, and congratulations on your graduation last year. It's very exciting, and so neat to just hear how you're giving back to that community. So I would like to introduce Renata Escobito, and she's gonna come on live so you can see her smiling face. And she has dedicated her education and career to working with teenagers who have experienced complex trauma and societal disadvantages. And in 2019, she became the program manager of Youth Emergency Shelter. And she's passionate about advocating to end youth homelessness. And she is currently on loan, I believe, to the shelter for unaccompanied minors and at the convention center. So I think she's going to tell us a little bit about that as well. So welcome, Renata.
Thank you. So yes, I am technically still the program manager of the Youth Emergency Shelter, and I actually started there as a volunteer many moons ago, and is what really ignited like my passion for these youth, because they are absolutely amazing. First, I want to say thank you to Afida and Zaira. I really appreciate their contributions and totally on the same page, and I'm so honored to be on the panel with them. They are two incredible humans doing really amazing work. And I just feel so lucky to be included in this. So yes, a little bit about the Youth Emergency Shelter. So San Diego Youth Services Youth Emergency Shelter, formerly known as Storefront, is a program that provides emergency shelter to youth experiencing homelessness or running away. We were actually one of the first 3 in all of the United States. And one of its former iterations actually Monarch came out of that. So they created a whole little school, and then Monarch branched off and became its own thing. And so there's still a lot of collaboration with the Youth Emergency Shelter and Monarch, and they are really awesome partners. I had the privilege at one point of being a clinician for another program specifically for youth experiencing homelessness, and we had a lot of referrals from Monarch, so I've gotten to work with them in a lot of different capacities, and they are a really, really awesome school and program. I'm going to talk a little bit more about like the micro issues, like the more personal challenges that these youth face when they're experiencing homelessness. And first, I want to say like homelessness creates a lot of barriers to education on an emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual level. And education is a privilege that is not afforded to everyone. And so their lack of participation is not anything, like Afida said, to do with who they are. It really comes down to the systems that are in place in our society and in our communities. So I'm going to touch base about that a little bit. First, trauma-informed care is my jam. And so I want to do a quick little synopsis about trauma-informed care and just how trauma and being in survival mode affects the brain. So there's this concept around flipping the lid from Daniel Siegel. And basically, if we pretend this is our brain, and this is the reptilian brain, so it's our amygdala, it's our most primitive brain, and it's identical to that of a lizard. This brain is in charge of like all of our like our breathing, our food, our survival. And so we actually have 3 main survival responses: fight, flight, and freeze. And so when we are in danger, our survival brain chooses for us. Our human brain, which I'll get into later, we like to think that makes our choices for us when we're in survival, but it doesn't. It's very much our reptilian brain, which is like super old when we think about evolution. Our prefrontal cortex, so when we're regulated, when we're stable, when we have safety, that is our human brain. So it's part of our brain right here, and it's in charge of everything that makes us human and separates us from all the other animals. So it's in charge of our verbal capacity, our critical thinking skills, our problem solving, our ability to story time, what happened to me yesterday, what happened to me today, what happened to me, what's gonna happen to me tomorrow, our meaning making. And so basically, when we are if our reptilian brain perceives any threat, it will flip our lid, it will make it hard to access our prefrontal cortex, our human brain, and it will put us in our fight, flight, and freeze. And so if our brain thinks we can fight the threat, it will choose fight. If it doesn't think we can fight the threat, it will choose flight. It will have us run away. And then when it can't fight and it can't flight, it will freeze us. And so that's kind of when we go into shock. And basically, a lot of our mental health concerns comes from one of these three responses. So basically, our mental health, these responses can be adaptive or maladaptive. So I'm not the biggest fan of diagnoses, but ultimately, like when those trauma and survival responses come out in a not so healthy way, we see that as like PTSD, anxiety, depression, as Afida was sharing. But there is the capacity for post-traumatic growth, and so ways in which we practice these in a healthy way. So that can be art making, reading. There's so many ways in which it comes out in adaptive ways. And I want to say it's not either or. All of us humans have the capacity to practice all of these survival responses and trauma responses in adaptive and maladaptive ways. And so with that, I also want to say, like, I'm going to talk a lot about the challenges these youth face, but I really want to make sure we know that, like, these youth are not their trauma, they're not their homelessness, and they have so many strengths and skills that and identities that are so much more than just that experience. And so if you ever, like, I think that was one of my favorite things. I totally came into Storefront as a volunteer with these preconceived notions and stereotypes about what it means, and they completely proved me wrong and blew me away. And it's been such an honor to work with them. And so a lot of the times, those symptoms, those trauma responses, they get translated and labeled as the bad kids. And all the other stereotypes that come along with these youth experiencing homelessness, when in reality, these survival responses are there to keep them safe. We see them really negatively, but they're really important to the survival of these youth. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to touch base on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is one of psychology basics, but it's really important because in order for us to, like, get to self-actualization, we need to be meeting our physiological needs and safety needs. And a lot of these times, these youth don't have either for a lot of different reasons. And so again, it's really hard for them to access their prefrontal cortex, which is what these youth need. Like, school is asking them to access that part of the brain, and they physically can't because they're in survival mode all the time. And so I think for me, that's something that when we get mad at them for not doing school and stuff, it's like, well, I mean, they're focusing on their survival. Like, they can't, that's a privilege to be in stability and to be able to access that. So just something I wanted to touch base about really fast. But I want to talk about a few examples about, like, lack of shelter. So a lot of these youth, like they said previously, they're sleeping in shelters, in cars, on the street, in public transportation, in crowded homes, they're couch surfing. And that instability on a physical capacity makes it hard. If you're in a crowded home, how are you going to focus on school and homework? If you don't know where you're going to sleep for the night and couch surfing, how are you going to focus on school and classwork? If you're living in a car with your family and you have to move around a lot, or again, you're couch surfing, like, the public education system, it's based on where you live. And so if you're moving around a lot, their school gets interrupted in so many ways. It's hard for them to make their first period because they are far away in their car somewhere. And so I feel like we don't really think about the ways that, like, stability makes it a way easier for these youth to be able to participate in their education. a lot of times these youth also, if they're in these vulnerable situations, we like to sometimes blame them for their risky choices, but really, again, it's attempts at surviving. And a lot of times unsafe adults are preying upon them. They get blamed for what happens to them when they're preyed upon, when they're trying to get shelter, to get food, to get their basic needs. And there are unfortunately adults looking out for those signs, and then they get trafficked either through labor or because of child sex trafficking. So they get blamed a lot for situations that are kind of out of their hands when they're just trying to survive. They also don't have access to technology for a lot of different reasons, which again, a lot of school requires technology. There's, again, they get called lazy a lot, but really they need rest. They are not getting rest at night if they're on the street, if they're couch surfing. There's a lot of reasons why they're not getting rest. And so it makes it hard for them to focus. And it's not that they're lazy. Again, that could be like a freeze response. They get sleepy, their brain's trying to shut them down because their day-to-day life is so overwhelming. Food insecurity. If you don't have food, imagine like when you get hangry, you get tired if you're not eating, like that's going to make it hard to focus on school. When they are present in school, they might be dissociating, thinking about past traumas that make it hard to regulate. There's a lot of reasons why even when they're present at school, they're not actually mentally or emotionally present at school. Or they're acting out, they're acting in, and again, they get blamed. And then there's consequences to that, or they get suspended or they get expelled. And again, that creates more barriers when they're just doing their best under impossible circumstances. The family impact. So a lot of times, like Aifida said, we don't want to, it's hard not at times to get frustrated with parents, but at the end of the day, we need to remember that they're trying their best just as much as they are, and they experience childhood trauma and abuse and homelessness just as much as their current kids are. And so there's also a lot of historical and intergenerational trauma that's happening. A lot of the mental health that they're struggling with can be stemmed back to all the ways in which they face oppression, which is gender-based oppression, race-based oppression, class-based oppression, the colonization. So going back for Indigenous communities to when they were displaced and attempted genocide, when for a lot of Black families, it can be tied back to slavery. And so again, like it's hard not to judge the ways in which these parents' mental health is coming up. But at the same time, they need just as much compassion and empathy because they do love their kids and they do try the best that they can. At the end of the day, what ends up happening for these youth is that they need to be caretakers for their siblings or for sometimes their parents who do have mental health concerns. And it makes it difficult for them to, again, attend school or be present. If they are experiencing neglect, physical abuse, or emotional abuse, that also, again, is a threat to their safety. And so they're thinking about the conflict in the home, or it makes it hard for them to be present again in class. I want to touch base really quickly about the CWS involvement. So CWS does not deem homelessness a protective issue, which at times has its pros and its cons. So a child should not be removed from the home just because they're struggling. There's a difference between not being able to provide for your family and not being willing to provide for their family. But at the end of the day, these families need resources no matter what. And if CWS does not deem it a protective issue, they are not getting involved in helping. So that can be challenging. On the flip side, a lot of these youth are not ready to disclose some of the abuse that's happening at home because there's a complicated relationship at time with parents. They love them, and then there's also harm involved. And so for those reasons, they're not disclosing. For shame, like shame is huge. It's embarrassing and really shameful to talk about trauma. A lot of reasons why anybody that has experienced trauma has a hard time talking about it because they're being threatened for their safety. If someone's already hurting you and they're threatening you that if you tell anyone, they're going to keep hurting you, of course, you're not going to say anything. A lot of LGBTQ issues come up. If your parents do not respect your identity and sexual orientation, it might make you run away, or you might choose, or you might be pushed out of the home. So a lot of kids who do run away are not ready to disclose abuse, and therefore it's difficult to get housing, even for our program. We need parental consent, or in order to invoke parental consent, we need to know that there's a safety concern happening to invoke minor consent. So if the youth is not ready to come forward about it, and the parent is saying, I don't want my kid at your shelter, where our hands are kind of tied, and it's the hardest decision ever. But a lot of time the youth, if CWS deems that the home is safe, they can't really stay with us anymore until they provide more information. And then a lot of times they choose the streets. So there are a lot of barriers at times for even them accessing shelter, emergency shelter with us. Most housing options for minors are for youth who are CWS involved. So again, even if there was, if they're not ready to disclose, there's not a lot of options for them to have housing. The impact of COVID, like everything went to technology, everything went to online, and all the public spaces they used to use to get resources, the technology or anything else closed. The libraries, the coffee shops, the schools, even our shelter saw a huge reduction in youth accessing shelter and referrals, even though we know that runaway youth, the statistics climbed, which was really scary for us, because we're like, where are they? We know they're out there, but it was really hard for them to access resources because all of the places they would go to were shut down. And then again, loss of housing options, all the few residential programs that we could refer to youth to closed down. We were one of the few residential services for youth that stayed open throughout the pandemic. And so we never turned youth away. We had reasons we would, but we never ended up doing it because we always wanted to make sure there was a safe place these youth could come to. But again, sometimes youth are scared of shelters. They've had bad experience in shelters, and so they still don't always utilize our services. And we never want to shame them for that. So that was a lot, but I feel like it's really important to really come up with examples and real life examples as to why these youth aren't participating in their education, that are way out of their control. And that is why like schools like Monarch is so important. That's not going to judge them. That's not going to shame them. That is going to be supportive as they struggle through like really their survival in this world, and really know the challenges of what that means for their not only brain, but to physically be able to focus on school. There's also something called Mckinney Vento, which is really awesome. It's a like a law that's put in place that provides extra services and hopefully reduces barriers. So for instance, if a youth has been identified as homeless and they are moving around a lot, like couch surfing or jumping from family member to family member, they don't have to change schools. They also have a reduction in credits because it doesn't make sense for them to have the same amount of credits as their more stable, privileged counterparts. Because those people, they have the support, emotional and stability to focus on their schoolwork, and these kids don't. So they have a reduction in credits. They also get a free monthly bus pass. So Mckinney Ventos and Monarchs, there needs to be more Monarchs in the world that really like are there for the kids, for these youth who are trying their best. So that's me. I didn't really get to talk about Expressive Arts or the Convention Center. But if there's any questions about it, so thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Renata. You know what, I think we have a few extra minutes if you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about the Convention Center and what's happening there, and then your passion, of course, the Expressive Arts.
Thank you. I can't share too much about the Convention Center because it's very like top secret federal, but yeah, we are, SDYS is a part of one of the many agencies involved in providing child care workers at the Convention Center. So we're helping house about 250 youth there who very much fit into this as like migrant unaccompanied youth who are very much in crisis, just like our youth who are citizens here. But as far as expressive arts goes, I love that Monarch has an expressive arts program, because a lot of times, again, thinking about the brain and how when you're in crisis, it can create difficulties in being verbal. It's so important to give these youth a space to express themselves in a nonverbal capacity. Trauma also happens on a super sensory level, so it gives them the capacity to express themselves in a sensory way, because sometimes it's, like I said, it's really hard for them to access their verbal capacities or anything else. It also helps them act to heal. So instead of like acting out or acting in, they can really practice some of these like trauma responses in a healthy way, right? Dancing, you're getting all that energy out versus kind of like a panic attack. Reading could definitely be expressive arts. You're dissociating, you're disconnecting from your reality in a way that's healthy, versus like maybe like substance use. Not to shame any youth who participate in substance use, because that is an attempt at self-medicating and it is an attempt at survival. But I think there's so much ways in which expressive arts really help this population express themselves in all the ways that they need to. But yeah, so I didn't really plan on it, but that's a quick little thing about expressive arts.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Renata. I appreciate your enthusiasm and your knowledge and the reminder about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's been a while for myself. Well, we have a few questions, but just as a reminder, if you have any questions and you want to go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, and we'll go ahead, and Kim's helping me look through those and such. But I'll start with a few of them. You're all very passionate about your work, and I love also hearing about Zaira, that she's just coming out of the gate a year into her career. But can you speak to the any of you, can you speak to the resiliency you see in youth that are facing homelessness?
I think the resiliency sometimes could be as simple as just going to school, showing up. Maybe it's not a good day, you didn't sleep well, but just the simple act that, maybe someone that's had more of a stable upbringing can't relate to, is just showing up to school. And, you could be tired, you could be hungry, your clothes, you haven't washed them in a few days, but just sometimes it's enough to just show up and try, because you're going to be around your support system, you're going to be around your friends who might understand what you're going through, who are more empathetic to the experience that you're living. And yeah, so that's also, apart from showing up, going to school, maybe telling your teacher, like, can I have an extension on this paper? I really want to complete it, or on an assignment, or can I remake this test? I was having a bad week last week, but I know that's not a reflection of my abilities. And yeah, those are just, they're very simple, but just those simple acts speak so much when someone is not living in a stable environment, or an abusive one, or even one that we don't talk about is students that live in Tijuana and they have to cross the border every single day. And it's happened with my peers where at 3:30 in the morning, they were in line to go to school, because in Mexico, if they were US citizens, maybe their family got deported, but they're US citizens. Schooling in Mexico is still, most of the time you have to pay for it, and sometimes you can't really afford it. So to get an education, you have to go. You could be in 3rd grade crossing the border every single day, twice a day, just to show up at school. Like, the resiliency that takes, you really have like a vision in mind. You're going to go eat, you're going to be there with your support system, and you're going to go to school. So that's also one that I don't think we talk too much about. I feel like that could be a whole panel in itself, the trans border students that you see so much of.
So Zaida said it all. What I will point out is the role that we play in what you just heard her articulate. What she articulated was the evidence of resilience. The role we play is in teaching the skill of building resilience, which is really what Renata spoke to about trauma-informed intervention in the education space is really about acknowledging pain, acknowledging what an experience is like, and then helping the student to identify what steps they can take to get control of the situation. And so we teach resilience building, and what she described is the evidence of resilience, right? But resilience, everybody has some level of capacity for it, but not everybody. Some people have a very high natural capacity for resilience, that they just have the ability to just understand what they need to do, and others don't. And our job is to level that playing field to give the tools, or to teach the tools for building the control that they need to have to advocate for themselves and to represent their state of mind, and to get out of their reptilian brain and to regulate themselves. All of that stuff is that's the kind of work we do at Monarch School and in any environment that is trauma informed.
And I think I want to add to all of that, like that's so well said from both of you. And it's also a lot of times it's a simple reframing. Like a lot of times they internalize the oppression and stereotypes of what it means to be a youth experiencing homelessness and be a challenging youth. And reality, like if you just reframe, like, I see you trying, I see this as a strength, and it's something that I know Monarch is, in that storefront youth emergency shelter is strength-based. We see what other people's challenges are and we pull out the strength. And the second you kind of point that out to them, they're like, oh yeah, that is what I'm doing. And so really like unteaching some of their internalized shame and oppression and really building up the strengths they already have and already doing. I think that's a lot of the work. The other part that I love about expressive arts is it lets them be the children that they are. And so that's another part, like my favorite part of at times doing expressive arts with them is all of the challenges wear away and you see their creativity, you see their capacity. And again, it's just building that and teaching those skills, because a lot of creative expression is teaching those regulation skills. It is turning back on the creative problem solving and a lot of the human, the prefrontal cortex. So I think it's already there. And I think that our society doesn't teach them to value those parts of themselves. And that's what I think Afira and Zaida are speaking to, is they just need safe adults. A lot of the time, that's all they need. And I love how Afira says the internal and external. And I always like to think like I can help create a pot and while they grow. So they do all the work, they're doing the growing, they're grabbing the sunlight, the rain, they're putting that all together for growth. And sometimes it's not even about solving their life, because we can't always solve their life for them, but it's creating that safe relationship with adults that then gives them the capacity to have that growth.
Thank you. That was great. I like that. Growing the pot. That's awesome. Well, that sounded wrong, but you know what I mean. Zoom fail there. Sorry. So we have a couple questions, and Afira answered them in the chat, but I'll just go ahead and read them just so people know. So one of the questions was, how can university students make a positive impact? And is there a direct way for us to get involved? And Afira is going to hit on that at the end a little bit more, but I'll just read what she said. Adult students are in a great position to serve as volunteer mentors, coaches, or tutors. You can also lead external volunteer projects to support unhoused youth, like jacket drives for colder months and backpack stuffing for the new school year. And their website is monarchschool.org. And then another question was, is Monarch only available for students that are experiencing homelessness? And Afira confirmed that yes, the student body, which is K through 12, is entirely made up of children and youth who are or have very recently experienced homelessness. Afira, would you add anything to that at all?
No, I think what I will share is a little bit of a sneak peek at what we're up to next, which is an intentional effort to not isolate ourselves, our one environment and our one campus, and to codify our practices, which are to some degree really proprietary. And there are practices that we created here and have refined over the years. And we want to take those practices on the road and bring them to other schools, other communities, even other parts of the state and beyond. And the reason why that's so important is we really do believe we've hit on a secret sauce here that will be effective. It is effective for other unhoused students, but also kids who are dealing with other forms of trauma, like the poverty state. Being in a state of poverty is also a traumatic event. So I just want to say that while we operate in this one place for this one population now, it is likely going to evolve dramatically over the next decade.
That's great. I'm sure you also have folks that come and visit you and are from all over the country that are looking to model that as well. Another question is there a website or somewhere where we can send people who are experiencing homelessness? And so maybe you could speak to that in terms of for youth or families. You might be able to speak to that in general as well. Either any of you.
You know, so one thing I mentioned is that I'm actually fairly new to San Diego. I've only been here for 8 months. So I'm going to look at Renata and see if she can answer that question for us. There are some systemic things I don't know that well yet.
Yes, I can. So one easy way is calling 211. 211 can give you all like a lot of resources and really fine tune what they're looking for. Another one is my website, San Diego Youth, sdyouthservices.org. We offer a ton of resources for youth experiencing homelessness. There's Tay Academy for transitional aged youth, and they have even like, they can help put down like rent, they can help buy groceries. We have Counseling Cove that provides counseling specifically specialized for youth experiencing homelessness or running away. And again, they provide meals. We do therapy and give them lunch. That's one of the ways we entice them. We're like, we can get you lunch every time we hang out, or dinner, or groceries, or a bus pass, or we can purchase coping skills. So like I buy art materials, and like so many things back in the day when I was a clinician there, and they're still there. So we have a ton of housing options for our 18+-year-olds. So our transitional aged youth, that's what they stands for. So we have a lot of resources for minors and even like that transitional age into adulthood. So sdyouthservices.org, 211, and then obviously Monarch.
Great. Yeah, and I would also answer that in terms of, that was the first thing that came to mind for me was the 211.org, and just in general for anyone experiencing homelessness or food insecurity, housing issues and such. Let's see. What is the intersection of unhoused youth and human trafficking? I think you alluded to that a little bit, Renata.
I just want to, I wanted to, yeah, this is such a critical subject that I hope gets its own conversation in this setting, because it's incredible. It is the key villain. When I think about what my students are battling in the streets on their way to and from school, the key villain is, particularly for our young ladies, our young women, or gender identifying women, is this notion that their exposure puts them in extraordinary vulnerability for human trafficking. And it is the truth. And the reason why it's the truth is really threefold. One, there is a really well-organized system of trafficking constructs that have the capacity to identify and target unhoused youth. And they do it through observation. They do it through infiltration into existing systems like the healthcare system and other systems where they're going to have an interaction with unhoused youth, including school environments. The second thing is that they recognize, or there is a clear recognition that their connection to family or safe and stable adults is limited or minimal. And that's critically important because this is the answer and the solution. When a youth has a safe and stable adult in their lives, then they have both a bit of protection or someone to go to receive advice or feedback and know that they're going to be safe. And without that, their exposure to this vulnerable condition and trafficked escalates exponentially. And then the third piece of it is really financial, right? If you are going to offer me both a feeling of belonging, a feeling of safety, and a belief that I'm going to generate some money to stabilize myself and my family, that's pretty attractive when you're 16 and unhoused, right? So it is a trifecta of circumstances that is really formidable and requires far greater attention and a far greater investment by the powers that be to be preventive. And one of the key ways of doing it is to empower educators with the knowledge to spot it, to prevent it, and to empower healthcare professionals with the knowledge how to recognize, to report.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. I think also like the whole, like how they're really preyed upon for their vulnerability. So people who recruit into trafficking, like there's a grooming process. They test really small, and they also feel the need of the safe adult. So they mask themselves as safe adults, and they build that trust and rapport with the youth. They meet these needs that a safe adults want to meet, but they're not safe adults. And so once they gain that trust and rapport, then they start asking for things in return. They start like taking advantage of the things they've provided. They also, like Afida said, these youth are very much in need. And so they also like, they test. So they find the ones that are most vulnerable. And they test in a way where if they get caught, they haven't technically done anything wrong. And so the most vulnerable youth with no, like lacking self-esteem, lacking safe like relationships, lacking basic needs, but then all of a sudden it kind of becomes the burden of the youth of like, you have the choice, you have to leave. When really there might be in the fight, flight, freeze, like their survival brain will help them out when they need to. And a lot of times that is like really actually building relationships with safe adults. And they unfortunately very much do infiltrate a lot of the spaces that youth will access. And they know how to fly under the radar. On the flip side, a lot of our youth sometimes get into that and they start developing complicated relationships because they have an unhealthy version of a trauma bond. There are healthy versions of trauma bonds. I want to say again, it's always on a spectrum. It's never black or white, but sometimes they get trauma bonded to their perpetrators or traffickers, and then they become traffickers themselves. Or traffickers are also at times youth experiencing homelessness, just trying to survive as well. So it's really gray. It's not as black as white as we'd like it to be. And again, it's just youth trying their best to survive in a world that, again, when we talk about rape culture, when we talk about like poverty, the glorification of like money in our world, and then we blame them when all of that mixes together in a way that we don't like. So that's something to throw out there.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Also just want to share, if you're not familiar with Center for Justice and Reconciliation, one of their areas is education around human trafficking. And so folks can also check out the website along those lines. Another question, I'm not sure if you would have a different answer than one that when we were talking about a website folks could go to, but I'll ask it anyway, just in case. What are best steps for someone who may ask for assistance who may be a minor? Like, are there any sort of like entry ways you might suggest initially than just sending them to a website? I'm assuming this is maybe if you're encountering a student.
The shelter has a 24-hour crisis line. I think it's 866 place to stay. And so we a lot of times give that to the youth in like a bracelet where you can't see it, so that if they ever like need to call us at any time of day, any time of night, they can call us, and there will be a counselor there to even just to talk to them, to provide resources when they're ready. A lot of our firmer youth call us because they want to maintain the connections that they've developed with the safe adults at the shelter. And so that's another way that they can get access to resources. Is we're really like to say that we're like the entryway that then connect the Monarch to all these other places that can help them stabilize and get resources. So we don't only provide emergency shelter, we provide case management to help them with their mental health, their physical health, medical issues, school, education, all of that.
Great. Anything, Zara or Afira, you would add to the
Yeah, so we are fortunate that in our community, we have in our educational leadership in the public school system and time and money in training their personnel. Otherwise, I wouldn't recommend this, but I do believe that in our region, we have a well-trained and increasingly well-trained team of leaders within school environments. So the easiest, most direct, and likely most effective way for a student to seek and support if they really need it is to go seek a conversation with their guidance counselor or their school administration, whomever they feel the closest connection to. They are prepared to help, and they do know how to direct the student and their families to the resources that are available to them, and to do it in a way that isn't a handoff. It's to do it in companionship with them, in support of their pursuits, as opposed to just a phone number or a website and telling them to take off, which is what you see in a lot of other communities.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. Thank you, Afira. Sorry, Zaida. If a youth comes up to you and you know of a youth, they need hand-holding just like any other youth does for any other like situation in which they need to learn. And so a lot of times it's so helpful if somebody calls with them and acts and reaches out to these resources. So if you know someone, don't just give out websites and phone numbers, like really help walk them through that process and be that first safe adult interaction. So encouraging, I'll walk you to your guidance counselor. Let's call the youth emergency number together. So that too, you can be that resource.
That's great.
Yes, exactly. I think advocating on someone else's behalf. I know this similar, but moving on to like a mental health, when I would see a student in crisis, I wouldn't just say, oh, H building to the left, room 205, whatever. I would say we were prepared to say, you know, you have free services, they take in crisis. Would you feel comfortable if I walked you there? Just, you know, and if someone doesn't feel safe in their home or something, maybe calling them on the home landline, that's not going to be the best thing. Or if they're sending a message going on a website and that's heavily monitored, that could potentially also be a safety risk. So advocating on the behalf of someone that you know that needs help, that's, I feel like, important. Maybe you don't know the website, maybe you don't know the number, but just even saying something like, I don't have the answers, but you know what, you and I, we're going to figure it out together. That will go beyond anything you could ever imagine. So yeah, advocating, walking them through, being that safe adult that they need. And they could be in middle school, high school, maybe even college. And, you know, we would never grow out of the age where we need a safe adult, someone that's there to help us, definitely.
Great, thanks, Zara. I have a question as someone who's been working for a while myself, and I'm sure you all could answer. How do you do self-care for yourself as you work in this, with this vulnerable population, and keep yourself going, keep yourself motivated? What do you do for yourself?
I will start by sharing to what I have learned are controversial thoughts. One is, as a leader in an organization like this, I lead by offering an example of never expecting to be perfect at the roles in my life, at all of them. So one of the things I say frequently is, on a given day, I am either going to be an exceptional CEO or an exceptional mom. I will never be both on the same day. And what that means, and I expect my employees to model that too, what that means is that on a given day, they may have the need to retreat and take time to do things either for their family or for themselves that allow them to feel whole and to feel like they're not letting anyone, including themselves, down. Or they may have to be or they may feel that commitment to their work environment. But I guess really what I'm saying is, the application of this logic is the expectation can be effective to the highest degree in all of the roles we play on everyday lives is one of the key reasons why the emotional fluctuation can harm us, as social care professionals. And so we have to understand going into every day, what are my two commitments today to myself? What level of am I going to bring to what roles? Stick to it. That's one thing. The other message that I often share is stop running from the pain and embrace it and learn from it. Self-care isn't necessarily going to ever happen for people to do the level of the work that we do at the level of proximity that we do it, because we are sharing lives with people who are struggling with trauma every day. So we can't shelter ourselves from their pain, or we will be ineffective in our roles. So what we have to instead do is practice gratitude, not just with the people we're serving, but also for ourselves. There is nothing wrong with practicing gratitude and saying, I am so grateful that my house, my family, my loved ones are stable so that I can go off and help others, and embrace the pain of knowing that exists, and stop trying to separate yourself from it, but gratitude instead. So the combination of those two things can work pretty well, I don't know, most of the time, half of the time, not always, but gratitude and deciding what roles are going to take priority placement in your life on every given day. It's a decision every morning, but it helps.
Great, thank you.
Ida, did you want to go?
Yeah, I can go. I think just, self-care doesn't always look like a face mask, a sheet mask, or a bubble bath. It's knowing, and the way that I see it is taking care of myself, physically, mentally, reading, taking the time off, disconnecting when I need to be, so I could show up the next day for my students, for myself. Because, if you can't pour from an empty cup. Whenever I did my presentations, I love that quote. And just in a way, putting yourself and your needs first, because once you're whole, once you're complete, once you're in the right headspace, you really are there to serve your students, your clients, whichever population, your employees, Afida. So just, I would even say what works for me is making a list of 3 things, 3 of the most important things. That way I love crossing lists off. I love writing them on a sticky note. And that for me, it just fills my cup. Just knowing that even if it's just respond to this email, the student needed food resources. That is one thing that I could do that makes me feel good and feel like I did something and I served something to someone that needed it. I mean, face masks are great, of course, but I feel like self-care sometimes gets lost in that. And just knowing what you can provide, not filling up your list. I know there's a huge thing of hustle culture where we want to do everything and wake up at 4 a.m, go to bed at midnight. That's not realistic, and that's just going to cause burnout. And the only people that it's going to, well, not the only, but the people that it's going to affect the most is your clients who have those expectations of you. So I would say take care of yourself first so you can take care of others.
Thanks,
Zaida,
Zaida.
I love that you mentioned grind and hustle culture. I was going to mention that too, so I'm a fan. I think for me, sometimes I think this field is, we like to think, and Fida touched on this, like we're human, we're gonna be affected, and people think that being emotionally strong means, oh, it's not gonna affect me. No, it absolutely will affect you. And that's why we're drawn to this field, because we're empathic human beings that can be on this journey with them through the darkness. And those are some of the like saddest moments. It's also some of the most beautiful moments where you're like, we are in this connection together and we're all trying on this earth, and like we can support each other through the challenges. And so for me, sometimes those moments are what really puts me through. A lot of the times it's hard not to get disillusioned and feel apathetic at all of the things going on in the world. But sometimes that's when I really have to touch into my anger and make that like to continue the fight of like, we need to make these changes, not only for ourselves, but for our community, which leads me to the concept of community care. I think in our individualistic world, we put a lot of attention on self-care, and it's a lot of responsibility. Like if we think about these youth, sometimes we tell them, you just need to self-care. And it's like, what does that mean to them? Like we're blaming them for not being like for the circumstances that are out of their control. And so for myself, that's also community care, venting with my coworkers, being there for these youth. A lot of times they want to be there for me, and sometimes it's a beautiful relational moment. They can be caretakers in a positive way too. So for me, it's also like the parallel process. I'm a big fan. Like when I feel like I can't do it, I'm like, if I can't do it and these kids are doing it. And so again, that like mutual relationship, we don't always show it to them because our job is to be there for them and not center ourselves. But behind the scenes, it's like we need to process what's coming up for us. And I think for me, that's a huge part of it. And again, even processing the privilege guilt. It's a really hard concept for people to sit with. But I think it's really normal in this field to be like, okay, I have privilege, and how can we have gratitude for that while also like using that to kind of like reduce these barriers. And I think guilt can be like when it's tolerable, it's a healthy emotion, just like all of them. So I'm a big fan of feeling my feelings, processing them with the youth, in my therapy, with coworkers, and really like staying in the fight with them all.
Thank you so much, ladies. We want to make sure that our community knows how to get engaged with Monarch School and San Diego Youth Services. So Afira, if you want to give the website again, and if you have any other specific ways that you feel like students can get involved.
Well, so it's monarchschools.org is going to give you some insight as to what we do it in ways in which you could be helpful. But I would suggest that if you want to be of service, one of the critical things to do is examine what your personal assets are in terms of talents, skills, and contributions, abilities, and think about how you can direct those skill sets specifically to serve, right? And so particularly in an educational environment, people who bring a specific capacity or skill set can really come into that space and offer that skill as a learning environment, to a learning environment. And so, I mean, we have accountants that come and help tutor and mentor kids in catching up in their math. We have someone come and teach a cooking class because they happen to be really, really good at vegan cooking. I mean, think about your personal assets and skills and the things that bring you joy, and recognize that what's really unique about bringing those skills to an environment like Monarch School or many others is you're bringing something that exposes the children and youth to the world beyond the scope of the environment they're in, right? So you will be fed by that, and you can also feed them with it. Another thing that I mentioned in the chat that's really important is if you don't want to have or aren't that interested in the actual one-on-one interaction with students or families, there is a really sufficient and significant need for actual supports for these families and their students. So doing things like on-campus drives or neighborhood drives for things that every kid needs and our kids don't necessarily have access to, like jackets when the weather gets chilly, or bathing suits when the summer's coming around, or socks. Socks is a big one. We never have enough of them. So think about how you can organize and facilitate your networks to be supportive of the population that we're talking about, that we serve.
And then I'll add sdyouthservices.org. There's a lot of different volunteer opportunities, not only for the shelter, but also for the convention center. And I think back to like what Afida was saying about donating, I think basic needs and hygiene, but also fun things. These kids need to like have normal experiences. So art supplies, tickets to games and other events. There's so much, like Afida said, like you can do, like there's connections. There's this amazing woman who gets people to come just like repaint our couches and reupholster them. So there's always a lot of projects that the shelter needs. And so if you have any skills or anything, reach out and we will figure something out together. So there's a lot of ways you can get involved, or sometimes at the shelter, it's just volunteering and hanging out and being that safe adult, similar at the convention center, engaging them and letting them just be children, that they just like, they get parentified and made to be adults at such a young age, worrying about their survival. So sometimes they just need the space to be kids just like every other youth. So that's a great way to volunteer and to help out, sdyouthservices.org and Monarch.
Great. Thank you so much to Zaira and Renata and Afira for just being willing to share your knowledge and your experiences and your journeys with all of us. I appreciate folks staying on just a few more minutes. Sorry, I didn't keep us totally on time. But I did want to admit that those of you who are planning to do an alternative chapel engagement reflection, I forgot to post it on the chapel Canvas page, so I will do that after this. So it'll be available, just look for it. It won't be due till Saturday night, excuse me. So sorry about that, that's totally my flub on that one. So, but I'm so grateful that we got to meet the three of you and have you share with our community. And I hope you'll see some students volunteering soon. I wanted to end by having one of our student leaders who works with both Center for Justice and Reconciliation and Community Ministries, Zach Lyons. He's going to share how you can get involved on campus. And then he'll close us out.
Thanks, Dana. Hi, everyone. I'm Zach. As Dana mentioned, I'm on student staff here at the CJR, and I'm also a leader for Wednesday Night Homeless Ministry. And with all the things that we learned tonight about youth experiencing homelessness, I want to provide a few opportunities that we do through community ministries to help out with people who are unhoused or unsheltered, but also with different areas of the community. Community ministries consists of multiple different volunteer groups that serve different areas of San Diego. We have homeless ministries, which focuses on building relationships and providing food for our unhoused and unsheltered neighbors of Ocean Beach and downtown San Diego. Our children youth ministries focus on serving K through 12 students through tutoring and mentoring. And lastly, we have visiting ministries, which focuses on building relationships with seniors, children, youth, and people with disabilities and others in the hospital through sharing talents and creative abilities. If you're interested in serving in any of these ministries, I encourage you to visit PLNU Community Ministries on Instagram, or go to pointloma.edu/community ministries and you could learn more how to register for these opportunities. And I might be a little biased, but I highly recommend checking out Wednesday Night Ministry. I'm not gonna say it's the best, but it's a great ministry. So definitely check that out. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Dana or reach out to me. And thank you to all our speakers tonight. Thank you to Mosaic and the CJR, and to everyone who came out to this webinar. We hope you have a great rest of the night, and I hope that we'll see you next semester, maybe in person. So have a good night, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.